if people say, I see this in you, and you start to hear that from multiple people saying, I see this in you, like listen to them.
In today's episode, I have visiting artisan Kristina Kelpe. Let's see how innovation meets artistry as we forge something extraordinary together.
You are listening to the Innovation Forge, the #1 podcast on adaptive enrollment management, exploring the data, marketing, and strategy that fuels higher education. Here's your host, David Dysart.
Hello, Guilders, and welcome to another episode of The Innovation Forge. I am your host, David Dysart, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on this journey into the innovative world of higher education and adaptive enrollment management. What if the key to successful technology projects in higher education wasn't just the system you chose, but how well your people actually understand it? That's exactly what we explore in today's episode. My guest is Kristina Kelpe, founder of Legato Strategic Consulting, who has built her career helping institutions navigate complex implementations like Workday Student and Slate, all while focusing on what really matters: clear communication, data integrity, and empowering teams to succeed. In this conversation, Kristina shows the surprising grad school lesson that shaped her entire approach, how asking one simple question has unlocked countless opportunities, and why sometimes the best project management strategy is just plain common sense. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by tech implementations, imposter syndrome, or just competing methodologies, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. Let's see how innovation takes shape today. Kristina spent 15 years in higher education focused on implementing information systems and CRM tools for career services, annual giving, advancement services, admissions, and enrollment services. Now she supports institutions as a consultant, primarily focusing on Workday Student, both completing Workday Student go-lives as well as Workday Student project turnarounds. She lives in Central California with her husband, daughter, and 2 dogs, a pit bull and a Vizsla. Hopefully I got that right. If not, Kristina can let me know in a minute. As a native of the Midwest, she embraces every moment doing California activities, including walking on the beach, hiking, and wine tasting. Other spare time is spent cheering on her alma mater, Purdue University, reading, listening to podcasts, or working out with her athletic trainers, which happen to be her 2 dogs. So, Kristina, there is one more thing about you that I want to talk about before we start the official interview. It's perhaps the most impressive fact that I know about you. It's that you drive a manual transmission. So you do have to tell me a little bit about that before we get into the interview officially.
Yeah, my dad drove a manual transmission, and I think when I was 16, I either could take my driving test with the minivan or with our manual transmission car. And so I opted for that, and it turned out that I found I really liked it. My dad had always liked it, so maybe it just runs in the family. So I drove that for many years until I moved out to California, in which case I moved to an automatic transmission, but as I was living in Los Angeles. But recently, when I moved to Central California, I was like, this is the time. We were kind of a 1-car family, and it was fine. And so we kind of splurged to get a second car. So yes, I have a Hyundai N-Line manual transmission, and we have lots of windy roads around here, which are so much fun to drive with the manual transmission. And I don't feel like I'm a car person, so it's just like it is kind of this random thing about me that I love driving this car.
I have never driven a manual transmission. It's my singular goal in life to never drive a manual transmission. So I appreciate that you're able to do it and find joy in that somehow, though.
Oh no, David, maybe one time when we meet up, I'll be able to convince you. I
Thank you.
think I could see a technical person like you enjoying it.
Now, we'll be so busy talking about Slate and Workday and higher education. We just won't happen to get to the manual transmission. But thank you so much, Kristina, for joining me here today on the Innovation Forge. We've worked together several times, and I do want to just kind of set the table and share some observations for each of these contexts so people understand my perception of you and how amazing you are. But while leading operations, you always had such an amazing grasp on the data, the strategy, the guidance you're able to provide the office, and always wanting to do things better. And then similarly, we were implementing Workday as a consortium. So when you moved on to that side of the project, it always felt like you were those 10 steps ahead and you were building with the twists and turns, much like your driving in mind. And at Beyond Academics, whether it was hearing from a client or just watching you in a meeting, you knew when we needed to actually take that step back, align to whatever the goal or the need of the institution was, not just the next checklist item. It really makes me think of you as a field general who not only knows where all the pieces are at, but where they're moving to, how fast they're moving. So with that kind of set, how did you cultivate that mindset, the skills and the presence to not only anticipate the challenges and the opportunities, but also to guide teams and the projects with such clarity and foresight?
Yeah, so I will go back to my higher education training, and I will say I had a lot of great professors in both college and graduate school that I think helped cultivate this. While at the time it felt horrible, when I was a graduate student at University of Chicago, we would have to read so many books. And I was the type A that I'm like, I got to read these 3 books that were so dense, packed with content, stressing out for most of my master's degree until finally a faculty member said, "Oh yeah, you're not supposed to be able to read all of that. If you could read all of that, then we didn't give you enough reading. The whole goal here is for you to be able to piece out what's important." And that stuck with me so long, and I think has served me well to be able to kind of, in this wealth of information and knowledge out there, try to figure out what's important and to be able to hone in on that. I also have had so many great mentors throughout my career. I've worked with people that have taken the time to explain things to me. I got my degree in English and political science, master's degree in political science. I thought I was going to be a faculty member until I saw they were struggling to get jobs. I loved working on the administration side of higher education. Maybe I'll stay there. But throughout my career, people that sat down said, "Let me explain how data joins work. We got the inner join, we got the outer join. Let me explain how a data warehouse works. How the focus on validation." I had a boss that constantly was like, "Validate, validate, validate," and it got like drilled in. So all these mentors throughout my career, that really just took me under their wing. I was like, "We're going to teach you," and I am so grateful to them and definitely owe a lot. I also just like asking questions. I try to just be curious and constantly seek to understand. I think that's that piece of being able to put myself out there a little more and be like, well, I'm not at 100%, but I can get enough of this to participate, and I'm going to keep asking questions. Just kind of naturally strategic. I'm kind of a big on, personality tests. They don't define you, but they can give you indicators. And I do have a lot of things in my personality, from the Strength Finder to Myers-Briggs, that I'm just kind of a naturally strategic person. So I do give a lot of credit to just some of that pieces. And then I just try to push myself constantly. I like to challenge, try to just keep learning, and it's really helped me.
Well, I appreciate your previous mentors, because it was also very helpful to have someone that I could look up to in the industry as a boss, as a colleague, and as someone doing great work in higher education. So thank you to the long line of folks and your own perceptions and own diligence that got you here, because I've also benefited greatly from it. So thank you. Now, having worked on the institution side, the consultant side, starting your own firms, how has each of these impacted your approach to innovation, or has your approach to innovation actually set you apart in those roles?
So I think I really just try to operate from a place of authenticity. And something that I've seen stand out is that if something's not making sense to me, I'm going to ask a question. I worked at a company once when I got into the Workday ecosystem, and I'd ask a question and I get all these people messaging me on the side like, "Thank you so much for asking that. I was wondering that too." And maybe again, it goes back to those mentors that have given me confidence to ask the question and to not feel like this is going to be a stupid question, which I try to ban that phrase in all meetings, because I feel like the more people just ask questions, the better. And it helps you to innovate. It helps you to take in, but you have to understand. If you don't understand what you're talking about, there's no way that you can come up with any kind of new ideas or how this might. I always try to seek to understand first. And until I can repeat back and they're like, "Yes, you have it," now the things that kind of naturally sort of came to me that I was thinking about, now I'm like, okay, well then let's try these out. I think I've had success. I've started small and tried things. And I'll like do something a little more. I'm like, well, that was successful. That got more feedback. it's built confidence over time, but it definitely is all like very small things where I felt so stretched. I'm like, how am I prepared to do this? Um, how could I speak up on this? Or especially when I was early in my career and I was even starting to build systems then, to be like, how could I be trained in doing this? When I had an IT person try to recruit me to their team and in my very first job, and it was like, I have a degree in political science. There's no way I could do a job in IT. And it's like, you can. Um, if you do just ask a lot of questions and you kind of see how things start to pick together, there's things that, you can do this. So I'm also super passionate about student success in higher education. I think that drives me to always want to do better. I feel like the more that people are able to maximize their higher education and really apply it into the real world, and I worry about higher education not being seen as enough value. So how do we, just for those that are there, help them along? How do we bring more people to the table? And we've got to do things differently. We can't keep doing the same. That's not going to get us there. So to do that.
Not surprised to hear that IT tried to recruit you for a very technical role. Your techno-functional mindset and approach to things is always really impressive. But you've also become somewhat of a go-to person for implementing and integrating Workday, one of the big SIS platforms that's really kind of making waves in higher education. And so many institutions are either implementing it, have recently implemented, or will do it soon. What went into your decision to add Workday to your repertoire?
Well, first of all, I really wanted to be a Slate consultant. It just didn't work out from a timing standpoint. I love Slate. I'm a huge Slate fan. I'd managed it at two different institutions, presented multiple times at Slate Summit. Like, I genuinely love the product and I think it's so flexible. But something I had thought about was I also had personal goals of with a young child and just wanting some more flexibility, that I really wanted to be able to work from home and work remotely. And my husband, we had plans that we really wanted to move to the Central Coast of California. We've only got one university nearby, only a couple of small colleges. So I knew it was going to be a little bit difficult. I kind of needed to ideally be probably more of a remote consultant. I saw a report from Moran Technology consultants that said most schools are going to be moving to a new student information system. So many of these student information systems were implemented in the 90s and early 2000s, and schools have been operating on since then. We've had a massive technology shift in that time frame. And these legacy systems just haven't been able to keep up. They were built on technology that was hard to add in, and people put in all these customizations. You kind of dug yourself into a hole. And so I saw this opportunity saying, okay, I'd implemented many systems. I had implemented Slate, but I'd implemented things in career services. I'd worked in advancement and implemented systems, and I saw that there's some consistency. And overall, it's like, even though I love Slate as a product, I could implement other things and still enjoy it. So Workday is kind of the first cloud system, and it was something where I think a lot of times working in these cloud products that requires being more techno-functional, which is my background. I don't write SQL code or, really like to get into the super detailed aspects of like coding and technology. So doing these cloud implementations really maximize those techno-functional skills that I built over time. And Workday's really done a great job of delivering like improvements year after year. I know in working with other student information systems, because I know at our institution, they were looking for a long time at like other products, and all these other products kept promising, we're going to deliver cloud, we're going to deliver cloud. And then they'd have to be like, well, technology changed so much in the last 2 years, so we had to scrap that, start over. And you kept being like, oh my gosh, cloud's been out for a while. I know I started my career in career services. They were using a cloud product in the early 2000s. And now I look back and like offices like the registrar sometimes are still, many of them today are on these on-prem systems. And that was really tough, especially during the pandemic. So the way that Workday has just delivered on this, it's been great. It is a large product. It's got a lot of, ways to use this. It's highly integrated across different campuses. So it is a big transition from, like when I implemented Slate, it was like for one office, not even, and maybe a little bit of financial aid, but it was really for one office. With Workday Student, it's something where, especially compared to even legacy system, incredibly integrated. say it's this power of one, and it's like, oh, that sounds great, and we're not going to duplicate work. Well, all those silos that have existed in higher ed, where each kind of office could exist and kind of doing their own way, it takes a little longer to do things when you try to do everything together. You do get a lot of benefits, and I think that's something higher ed's constantly trying to shift towards, like a holistic student experience. Um, but these implementations take a lot. And so it's worked out for me in that there's just a lot of work to do. And right now I work on the school side of things. There are these official implementation partners that do this. It's quite different from the Slate model. I would say this. So there's a few firms, but all they're really doing is implementation and then some post-production support. There's a lot more on the school side of things that needs to be done, as the student information system touches all, like, basically every operation at the institution. There's a lot of things that the school is responsible for, like testing, validation, designing the user experience, really just making sure your actual process is effective. That's not something an implementation partner, they're technical. They're not there to give you best practices from what's a good idea in higher education, or how do you make sure you constantly will have clean data, and trying to get ahead of that. Like, that comes from internal processes. So I blend this knowledge of Workday, of other systems, and I also help schools with their entire technology stack. And there's many times that I'm like, Slate could do this better, and it's going to do it maybe more in a more cost efficient way. So trying to help them pick the right tools for the right situation. And it's had such impact, and I've found it to be so rewarding.
Yeah, no, I was always amazed when we worked at Beyond together, seeing you kind of work and dance around the limitations and what Workday was doing well to solution problems. But also when we started there, it had been a few years since we had worked together, and you were talking Slate, and I'm like, oh, you still have a better grasp on Slate than most Slate people that I talked to. So it was just very impressive to see how you were connecting those two worlds. Maybe you could share a little bit of how Workday and Slate can interact to transform institutional processes. Where do the systems interact? How can they complement each other?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is a passion. I love it when people are using both. Um, so Workday as a system can do things around, registration for classes, generating a transcript, and or even paying your bill. And of course, Slate is such a flexible system. Could you try to make it do these things? Possibly. I think there's this balance sometimes right now between these super configurable, flexible systems where there's not necessarily custom code like people think of before. Like, you can just configure within the limitations. But then sometimes people look for more like just pre-delivered, like, I don't have to build a tool that's going to generate a transcript and lay it all out. It's there, and it can just do this. And it's what the tool was meant for. And so Workday is really good. It's really good registration process. I've not heard really anything negative about schools as an overall piece. Of course, there can be like little individual situations. Overall, schools are blown away from going from the registration system before, super bumpy, overloads of students, to seamless. And students really like it. And so that's something it can do really well. It has some tools for messaging with student engagements, and I think it can work for the right institutions. But compared to what I've used with Slate, which is a CRM tool, it's one of those things of like, it's built for messaging. It's built for these complex, drip campaigns and what you can do in this. You can't, Workday has more guardrails. So in terms of, it gives you these delivered business processes, which essentially is like a workflow. But if you wanted to have a custom workflow, or you need some like a document review process in there. So, for example, someone wanting to apply to graduate, and maybe they submit a form. Also, forms are not, I think, they're nowhere near in Workday what they are in Slate. So just having a really easy form system, you're constantly needing to like spin up forms and be able to do it real fast, flexible with the data and reporting. Workday can do it, but I think sometimes picking the tool that it's like, you know what, we're going to change our mind about this form probably like 5 times. How many times you build something is like, actually, let's get this data point. Actually, let's get this data point. And with Workday, it's a little bit of like, you have to copy your questionnaire and the data gets moved. So if you need something super flexible, spin it up quickly and easy for people on a team to be able to collect this data or even pre-populate the form with data so that you could send a custom link like what you can in Slate and not have to put their name, student ID, address, all this stuff that you already know about them, get as few clicks as possible. And like, that's where Slate can do some amazing things with this. And again, those like custom workflows, I can think of like when I've looked at the graduation process, a lot of times it's a lot similar to like an application review to say, okay, they've applied to graduate. Now we need to evaluate, well, have they met the requirements? Well, they're like missing this one class, so we need to track them on this, or, maybe they're on the edge of some things of like, well, if they failed this one class, now they're no longer going to graduate. It's easier to build some of those customizations, I think, and they're not really customizations into Slate. Slate just has a framework that to me is more flexible. And so for those things where you're like, I need more flexibility, I need to do it. And Workday has built tools like Extend, and I haven't gotten to use it personally, but I see amazing things from other institutions that have been able to do some more of this. It's just you have to have that like more technical person that can build Extend stuff. Slate to me is more of that techno-functional. So sometimes you have to think about staffing and what kind of people do you have on your team and being able to get there and how much can you retain, like a Workday Extend person versus it's a lot easier to retain someone on staff and you probably have some people that know Slate, which can just be used kind of broadly to address many things there. So I'm going to think there's one more thing with Slate and with Workday is I just want to speak a little bit more on the forms. So there's some things in Workday which again, it has really solid processes, but there's some things like changing your major. Right now, Workday is still building out maybe a stronger student experience for this, that many schools opt to not necessarily use that. It's a really great thing from a data standpoint. Like Workday does an amazing job of organizing the programs of study and how to report on it, way better data than they're often getting from their legacy system, but it just doesn't have that user experience. And so to me, I'm like, if you just put in all that data into Slate, the student can have their own custom portal, they could be able to fill out the form there for that. And Slate could say, oh, you chose this major? Well, I know in order to do that major, you have to do this concentration. and you like present that to the student in this very nice experience. To me, it's all about the user experience. As few clicks as possible. How do you get this? And that goes to the student success. How do you get people through this so they're not getting stuck and frustrated, on the administrative pieces? And Slate's very easy to integrate with. Workday's really easy to integrate with. Like to me, those two products can cover and be flexible to do a lot within your technology stack. And if you could kind of go all in on that, then maybe there's some of these other smaller systems that you might not need to use, and you kind of have them as your like two hubs of data.
Oh yeah, no, I think one of my favorite parts, because I would definitely consider myself a Slate person, and one of my favorite parts is that crafting that student and staff experience, whether it's with forms, portals, communications, and yeah, being able to be empowered as a techno-functional user of Slate, which again, that's also how I would consider myself, is really great, and it's such a strong element of the system. For maybe some of the more tech-savvy listeners, are there any best practices or key considerations for making Slate and Workday maybe play nice together?
Yes. So to integrate with Workday, and I would say I am not an integrations person, but basically for those this is where I'm on like the edge. I'm pushing myself here that I talk enough about integrations. When I work them, there's this thing called EIB, which I think Enterprise Integration Builder. Basically a way that you can load data in via Excel. And if you're going to build an integration, it's going to be based on basically the data points that you have there. So you can generate these EIB templates to basically know if I'm going to do an integration to Workday, this is how the data would have to be. This is how it have to, and what's even greater is on some of these EIBs, you can generate it with data. So you can really see the exact template of this is how it should look for an individual student. So if you generate it with data of saying, okay, for an applicant, and I'd have to double check that you could do that with that EIB, but if you generated a data or an EIB with data for like an applicant, then that would tell you all the data points you need and also understanding the ID. So I think a mistake that a lot of people make is that from Slate, they're just sending the data as is versus, you can use, translation tables, export codes, some way to say, well, in Workday, the code would be this. And I think a lot of people don't realize the flexibility that Slate has, to be able to make the data be exactly what you need it to be. And instead, they're using these studio integrations to transform the data, which now you have to have a Workday integrations expert that understands the studio integration, and they may not understand this as well. And this is where I love empowering the people. And that's like, I think a goal of both Slate and Workday as products is to empower the hands-on users in this. And so, there's constantly programs of study being added and being able to get them mapped instead of having to ask the integrations person to go in and, you don't give them the full exact instructions, they might mess that up versus just being like, sure, oh, the college added, this new program of study. We put it into Slate. We get the reference code as what it should be in Workday. Boom. We don't have to change anything in our integration. We don't have to have this transformation of like what it was to here. So those are some just super simple things that I'm like, I just see too many people trying to make Workday do the load that I'm like, oh, Slate's really good at sending data in the way that an external system might need it to be.
Yeah, I feel like between like the export values, the translation codes, the content blocks, whether it's through integrations or again, as we're talking about that student experience, it's such a powerful tool that you get with Slate, just built in, very low/no code, really. Of even if you're getting into like formulas to do a little bit fancier stuff, it's still so much more accessible than, like you said, bugging your Workday person to rewrite, integrate. Like, yeah, it's so much easier to do in Slate and manage that process in Slate. So, transitioning away from the technical piece a little bit, let's talk about your newest venture, Legato. I love the name. It's just that smooth, continuous flow. It's tied together, which is exactly what higher ed strives for their process. Again, strive maybe being the key word there. We're trying. We're trying. Can you tell us what Legato does and your vision for the consulting firm?
Yeah, so I just see so many implementations of technology where people didn't step back and think about that big picture. They focused on, their office or maybe just like, okay, we just got to implement the technology versus saying, well, what's our desired outcome? What's our desired student experience in this? What am I actually trying to do? Why do we even do it this way? If you start with those questions, and an easy way like that I like to even be able to say to do this is like, you should be able to communicate these and another office on campus should be able to understand. If you can have your financial aid office understand, or even just let's pick someone annual giving, someone that's not even like you don't even maybe collaborate with as much, but you know what? They understand higher ed in general. They understand the institution, maybe some of the programs. If you can say, this is what we're trying to do, and you be able to explain it at high level, and it's high level work that, for the most part, there's smart people on campus and be like, yeah, that makes sense. And if they can't get it, then you're too tied into the details. You're probably too tied into how your technology worked before. And maybe those same technology limitations exist in whatever you're trying to do in the future, but trying to step back and be like, at the very high level, this is what we're doing. Okay, now let's break it down into that next level below that, which might start to make some considerations of the technology. And then you've got like a ground level where it's like, yeah, we have to get super into the detail. So with Legato, I love it when we get to work with schools at that high level. And if you've got the people on your campus and you can facilitate this and you can take that advice and run with it, go for it. And I'm happy to share more, if anyone has questions. But sometimes having that third party neutral person to come in and help you communicate. I started my career in career services, and actually a couple of other people on my team did as well. And I think so much of what we learned is I've had students come in and they're showing me this resume that has all kinds of things on it, and they're trying to apply for this job. And I had asked them the question, tell me the top 3 things that make you qualified for this job. And they do an amazing job. They're like, it's these 3. And I'm like, I don't see that in your resume. And so this is where helping people tell that story and help them get to that high level, and then you can get to the outcomes you want. Then we'd start to build the detail into the resume. So when I get to do pre-work with schools to let them prepare for any kind of technology transformation or just to get their operations clean, that's my favorite work. But what we also do is kind of like hands-on work with institutions. So there's things where, I've worked with schools going in and they're just strapped. And so it's like, well, let me do the testing on Workday or my team, because we know when we run into something, it's like, oh, that was a security issue, or nope, that's not what we talked about in the meeting. That's not configured correctly, so that we can get as much done. So by time the person that comes in, that maybe they have backfill in their office to help cover them, or it's limited, but anything, they don't have the time to be doing the super detailed testing, and they're just frustrated because, they don't know that it's a security issue, like what I can figure out. So we try to do as much of the legwork, and then they're more doing sign-offs. And they're like, yes, this is meeting my requirement. But there was a lot of legwork in between what the implementation partner does to the testing, which is a school's responsibility, and then to say, like, yes, it's working. And then the other thing we love doing is transitioning from, okay, this was done in the technology, but what are the operations going to be? Because you change out your core technology, and I think this happens with Slate. You switch to Slate, all your calendar of activities, like, yeah, you're going to admit students on the same dates and all, but a lot of the logistical stuff of like what you need to do when completely changes. And so building out that operational calendar, building out all the training, the job aids, all of that stuff, doing the data validation. I know you and I worked together when we were at Beyond on a project on that, to just helping an institution validate that all their data was coming in. And because it's a translation, I think people think it's a one-to-one match. It's like, no, Workday is on a different data model. And so you have to translate it, and you have to kind of see if that works. So I would say just through this all, we take a very strategic approach, really making sure that we're accomplishing the goals. I hear a lot sometimes of people saying they feel like it was a checkbox before, and now we're able to move it to feeling like, okay, I understand this. I can actually do this. But we are flexible in how we support schools. So based on each person, each team, each institution, we adapt to like fill in the gaps around an implementation, because these, at least with student information systems, these are multi-million dollar implementations. You really want to make sure you're spending your money wisely, and you don't have this gap that, you've got students that are maybe can't register or have questions about registering. It doesn't deal with Workday. Workday has a strong registration system, but on the institution, make sure all your operations and testing have been completed so that you're maximizing your technology investment. And that just often needs more resources or people that already kind of know what to look for, to make sure it's going to go smoothly.
Yeah, I feel like that operational piece is so easy to overlook, but so critical for success. Now, how has your experience, though, at maybe Pitzer, Beyond Academics, your other institutions, and with platforms like Slate and Workday, how has that influenced Legato's core services or your work there?
Yeah, so I didn't have any training in project management and higher education, and my first implementation was in a product, Simplicity and Career Services. So in these implementations, you often don't get those additional resources, and so you just had to do this. So I just kind of, in all of this stuff of what I've implemented there, when I did it in advancement, even at Pitzer, I do a lot of just what I call common sense approach to this, of like, let me understand the problem and see what I need to do. And I think at all of these institutions, there wasn't a set, you have to follow this methodology. And I'm not PMP certified. I could see a lot of benefit. I think there's really good tools, but sometimes I think when people get a methodology, they're like, I gotta follow the methodology, and it's hard to step away from this. I saw at an Alliance conference last year, a school in the Netherlands present something like, is it agile or is it common sense? And I think that resonated so much with me. And I loved that what they kind of presented in this presentation was about, take your methodologies, take your tools, but step back and don't be so tied to them. And with how that influenced Legato's core services is something of that flexibility. We don't come in and say, this is what we offer, this is the way we need to do it. How's their team feeling about things? Like, where do we need to start with them? And, maybe if they're, more up to date on technology, hey, we've got a few systems, we just need a few tweaks. Great. We can help you do that. The more that we try to, I guess, work ourselves out of a job. And I think that's my experience from higher education. I saw too many consultants that would come in and they'd give these high level recommendations. They'd spend all this time, and the whole time I'm thinking, either one, they got it wrong, or two, like, yeah, we already knew that, but it wasn't the hands-on work. And so that's what I also feels like makes Legato different, is that we're not there just to give recommendations. We're actually there to like work side by side and kind of give people that extra boost, that extra training, that sort of like mentors that maybe they don't have in this, guide them through that smooth transition, and then back away to say the more that they're empowered and things are running beautifully and they don't need us, that's a win. I am not taking kind of the traditional consulting model of like, well, you got to get more money and you have to like get that business. Nope. I want to live on the recommendations of the schools I've worked with, of saying they helped me so much and that we got so much value out of it. You've got to work with them. You can't do this implementation without them. And knowing with schools with Legato, there's no set, oh, you have to sign up for this contract and you have to agree to it. It's a lot of like pay as you go, you know what you need. If you try it out and you're like, do you know what, actually I don't know we need your help, which so far I've not found, but I'm like, you know, it's zero risk. It's like, it's kind of like that safety net, someone to have on your side as that coach that you can pull in. So you've got that, because being under resourced, I've seen schools not go live on time, to be delayed. And you delay a year, you're talking at least usually for a typical school, $5 to $10 million, which is a lot. So it can seem like an investment. I know when I moved up to where I live now, I'm the kind of person like, I don't want to overpay. I don't want to have extra resources that I don't need. And yet, you know, I underestimated what I needed from a moving truck and I ended up paying a lot more. And I think that was just a move with these multi-million-dollar implementations. You don't want to be under-resourced. So trying to get this in, again, I think, again, I love higher education. There's not, you know, I think the extensive money, things that maybe are at companies and things like that. So we try to operate also on the, like, as lean as possible. I mean, it's that frugal piece. I come from the Midwest and like family, it's like trying to not pay anything extra against the all, as much money can go back to, you know, student success and that impact at an institution, but also getting the people, you know, people what they need to truly be successful.
Yeah, no, I love that flexibility piece, both from as the firm, but also like the project management piece. Like I started going down that road and I'm like, no, thank you. But starting to take the courses, I'm like, oh yeah, I understand. Like, oh yeah, I was taking those waterfall principles here because that's what was called for in the timing and the type of project. But like, yeah, Agile works more here. And so being able to be flexible to adapt with the project, with the institution, I think is so important and overlooked oftentimes. So I'm glad that you're bringing that to your work. I also like to talk about how things can be done differently to build better. How have you positioned Legato to be different from other consulting firms? I know we've touched on this already a little bit.
The phrase that I haven't really talked about is that we take this approach of people, process, and then the technology. So we believe user experience plays so much into that people aspect. If people don't have a good user experience, then it doesn't matter how great the technology is. Like they're not going to do it. The change management. I can't tell you how many times, you know, we help people feel heard. It's a win to me when everyone on a team feels like I'm their ally. Perfect, because that's exactly the way it is. But so much of the time is being able to hear someone and piece out, like, is this what you're saying? And then actually, more often than not, finding more alignment at institutions, maybe where people thought they were, you know, at odds, and saying, actually, I think it's the same. You just had different perspectives in this. But there's really shared goals here, and I think we can meet each side's, you know, desired outcome in this. So we really work within the cultural norms of the institution. I try to, instead of something like coming in and be like, these are the technology tools you have to use, to be like, what makes sense here? You know, what do people like to use? When you try to force, you know, project management tools on people that they despise, it is not going to work. So if you're a Box school, all right, we're all in on Box. You're using Confluence, whatever it is, and then constantly going to what are the strategic goals. I hate when these strategic plans are like sitting on a shelf and not like really impacting the day-to-day. And a lot of that means, you know, there might need to be some change in operations, or where do we spend your time? So one of the things we do is we just really try to be kind. You know, I think it's not as common of approach, and maybe it's just we have a team that's been in higher ed. And so we love being sort of like these temporary employees. And I love working with the schools. I feel embedded in that we are, there. I'm always sad. I mean, I want them to not need us anymore because we've worked ourselves out of a job, but it's also kind of sad. Like, there's so many wonderful people in higher education, and I love being able to work with them. We're also maybe a unique thing that I haven't talked that much about is we're data first. So we're constantly in thinking about configuration, be like, what's the data going to look like? Well, what would we use the data for? Oh, well, if we need the data for that, then we should make sure to have this into the configuration so that it's available there. Like, where is this going? What is this being used for is a constant, like, just question. And then, like I said, we just do a lot of filling in the gaps of like what needs to be done. But I know we've talked a little bit about that already.
No, and that's what I did really enjoy working with you at Beyond, was being able to like, oh, a need popped up and we were able to fill it. Or I had referenced it a little bit earlier, like we were working towards that checklist item of just, we got to get this done by this date so we can keep things moving and flowing. And you took such a critical step back. It's like, why are we doing that specific action item to get there? Is that what we actually need? Is that what's going to be helpful? And no, it wasn't. So it was so critical at that point to stop, take a pause, and then actually work to what the institution needed to happen. But thank you so much for those insights. I'm really glad that we could go through that and you could share those with the community. While you're here, though, I'd like to get your thoughts on another question for our segment. It's crafting change, highlighting case studies that have successfully evolved, showcasing the steps took to rework legacy systems into more adaptive models. So what kind of tips and tricks do you have for implementing an SIS or other system as it relates to your CRM like Slate?
I think always you've got, every time I have to map things out in a workflow format. So with your systems to say, how is this going to flow? I know I worked with a school recently that we mapped out the Slate to Workday integration and trying to get all the different steps down. I mean, I'd love to, even before something started, again, at that super high level, not the detail of like, oh, we got to send this on this date because we got to get the student ID and then that's going to come back. Nope, that's a very technical like limitation piece. That's not necessarily like a desired outcome. So saying like, we want to get our student ID earlier because, we feel that if they have their student ID, it makes them feel part of the institution, or we need this because PowerFades needs to have that as the alt ID or something along those lines. But like trying to get those high level stuff, that there's like magic in mapping things out in a workflow format. And then in addition to that, I like to have multiple versions. So maybe there's a detailed qualitative version. You got the story, it's because this person is here and this is why this was. And that is like the supplemental document to your workflow. But then maybe also, I know I just worked on this recently, of having a very high level piece, for more the average user, the like, I'm lost in these like detailed documents. Again, thinking about like high level and like on the ground, like all are valuable. And the more that we communicate with one another, I think it just leads to so much efficiency and people being on the same page. How much time, money, energy is wasted by us all talking past one another. So investing in communication to be on the same page, to have shared documentation about what processes are there. And for people, again, communicating across different levels, because if you only have technology documents, you think about someone like an admission counselor, they'd be like, I have no idea what this is, and they're checked out. So how do you get some of this in their language so they know enough so that maybe it prevents them from making mistakes because they just didn't understand the whole process? I understand it's work, but based on, in higher ed, we just haven't invested in that. And seeing that transition to investing in that and the amount of times to reduce mistakes is incredible. And one other thing on just like the reworking the legacy systems, and this is super small, and I know I did this in Slate and I've done this a lot in Workday, is trying to have proactive reports that find you issues.
Yes.
What is not, everyone should have this. This person didn't meet this criteria. In Workday, you can build a dashboard, and I often build these internal dashboards, and it just displays like a preview of the report. And so someone can just go check their dashboard to be like, oh, we got some data showing up here. Like, need to go take a look at it. it helps reduce the firefighting from like how things operated previously in a legacy system so much. And so often it's easy to do. Um, to just constantly have validation reports to be like, mistakes are going to happen. We're just going to accept that and embrace it, but we're going to get ahead of it. So then we're not like running around and trying to react to it. We're constantly like on a daily basis finding these things, fixing them before they cause problems.
Yeah, definitely. I loved all of it, but yeah, the outburst there at the end was just, I think, it spoke to me on a very deep personal level. So yeah, definitely being proactive about those catches. So a lot of great takeaways there as well. Thank you for sharing that with us. Before we wrap up, every artisan leaves their mark. In the Smith signature, I'll ask a few quick questions so you can stamp your personal hallmark on today's conversation. So what's one tool, digital or otherwise, that you rely on daily to keep your work running smoothly?
I think it's got to be um, online organization of some sort. And I kind of move between tools, but something to say what's supposed to be happening next and trying to keep that organized. I think sometimes I've tried to do like sticky notes, and I do have at my desk, like sometimes I'll jot down the notes because it's sometimes easier to write. And it's funny because usually I'm all into just like documenting, but I've got to move it into like a calendar, something to keep organized and to be able to go back and be able to check it off. And I know a lot of people do it, but I'm like, it's just one of those things I absolutely have to. My calendar drives my day, my checklist, so I don't lose track of anything.
I just recently had Haley Burke on, and her answer was calendar as well. So, what has caught your attention and sparked creativity or innovation for you?
So I would say one thing is LinkedIn. In the Workday ecosystem, there are so many people on there posting fantastic advice. And it's funny, like it kind of takes you on this rabbit hole because you find one person, you're like, I like their advice. And then it's kind of cool. The LinkedIn algorithm, I think, is like, well, this was a second connection of that person, and look at this advice. And you're like, well, that's brilliant. So I got to follow them. And it just even the community that it feels. Sometimes it can feel isolated. I know I think my approach to Workday is very different. And so when I've been able to find these other people that are also just trying to find better ways to communicate the information, break it down, how do we tell a better story about it? Even I saw someone today, they said, I had a hypothesis about how integrations worked. And so I did this experiment and they posted their results. I'm like, this is amazing. And I loved how they just shared that on LinkedIn. It didn't necessarily apply to me, and it was something deep into integrations between studio and orchestrations that I didn't fully understand, but it's something it's like I saved it because I want to come back to it. I want to understand it more. But it was like, yeah, the timing ends up being actually pretty much the same. So, yeah, I think LinkedIn's evolved a lot, but I think it's not, everyone meets in different spaces. I know on the Slate, I like to be part of this Technolutions Facebook group. I know there's Slack, but I'm like, at least for Workday, LinkedIn is one of the top places to get information.
Yes, if anyone is on LinkedIn, please do follow Kristina. We'll go over that in a little bit, but a great follow. You're always sharing such insightful things, whether it's on Workday, but even if you're not in that Workday space, I think the approach you take to systems, and whether that's implementation, optimization, bettering things, or just working with people, being nice in the ecosystem, you have so much wonderful content in LinkedIn that is just available. And the same thing with a lot of other people. I was not very into LinkedIn until starting at Beyond because, yeah, the watering hole for Slate is more of the Facebook group, the Slack channel, things like that, community forums. But being able to start curating that feed, it's like, oh, okay, I don't have to scroll on a random social media network while I'm in line. I can hop into LinkedIn and get these fun snippets or pieces that are super helpful in my daily life. So wonderful piece of advice there as well. So if you were starting your career today, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
To definitely not be caught in what my training is and to be willing to take more chances. See what if people say, I see this in you, and you start to hear that from multiple people saying, I see this in you, like listen to them. I think it was a big leap for me to move on to the truly more like even its techno-functional side. I was working in annual giving and I had someone in advancement services, which is more of that data technology reports, not necessarily IT, but so that's why I'm like techno-functional. They came and they're like, I want you to come work in advancement services. And again, they're like, we just can see that you're detailed. We see what you've done. And that was multiple times that had happened. And I had to go through this whole like self-reflection to be like, am I really going to be happy doing this? I went back to personality. Of course, it was like a research task, but knowing people that you trust and you hear multiple pieces and sometimes just giving it a chance and saying, you know what, if you try it and it doesn't end up working. And I kind of found in advancement services, it was more on financials and gifts, and I liked being more tied to the people aspect of it. So once I moved into more admissions, it was like, oh, this is perfect. It really like you had the stories, the people, and even a lot of more things I do is with registrar data. That's been a total sweet spot. So sometimes you might not get it quite right, but like listen to those things and just be curious about it.
I feel like I want to do a whole episode just on that. So I think that's a really great thing for people to hear, whether it's that perspective, the imposter syndrome, or just really being able to be open to those new spaces or new avenues for work or life, whatever it might be. Such an important element of innovation and being able to continue to professionally and personally grow. So thank you. Great piece there that I hope everybody can ingest, whether you're younger or older. But so last one, what is one project, goal, or aspiration that you kind of have on the block to work on right now?
Yeah, so we're trying to put together some like more set offerings. We've just started to release a quality assurance piece of it, where schools can have different levels that they could work with us. If you're like, you just want someone to like, it's like the building inspector coming in, being like, yep, everything looks good. It's a neutral third party. And one thing I guess I haven't mentioned is my company, we don't have any financial ties to Workday or anyone else. We live completely on the satisfaction of the schools that we work with. And I say that is I want to get along with everyone and to say this, but I'm like, I, at the end of the day, want to protect a school's interests. And so being able to say, I know Workday and I know what schools are trying to do and are they on track to meet their needs and trying to prevent any kind of project delay. So that's one offering, but we're working on trying to do some more for both pre-implementation, during implementation. So schools that are just like, I don't know if I want to bring on a consultant, for like so many hours, but just having able to have a block of hours or some set tools that they could use, and to be able to work with us. We are looking to release that more. So we do have the quality assurance piece up and it's on our website, and I'm very excited about it.
No, I love that transparency and that being able to be more focused on that public facing side. Mutual friend John from Reworkflow, who we chatted about briefly before we started recording, I know is also being much more transparent with pricing and those different models on his website. So I really enjoy where we're progressing towards as for the consulting side of things, of being able to be flexible with what the institution needs and not just like, oh yes, I need to bill so many hours this week because that's just the business model. So that's great to hear.
And I just want to add, I think some of that, and I know Jonna, we talked about that when we chatted just personally recently too, but it's really what Technolutions has done that was a model for me. I love that you can go on their website and they give you a price range for their product. And so you don't feel like you're being scammed. And I think it's a very affordable piece for the value that's delivered in that. And because I again, want to respect people and say, like, this is the honest pricing and just being able to put it out there. And it's the same for everyone. We don't say, oh, well, based on your situation, I think I could get this out of you. So it's like, nope, it's just fair pricing. Of course, we always work to customize, for an institution based on their needs or what they would have, but just even trying to get a sense. I like doing that. I don't like to have to go and ask someone to be like, if I have to ask a price, it's probably too much. So it's just really upfront, and we try to make it affordable. And again, very high value for the school.
That's great to hear. So if the listeners wanted to reach out about working with you or connect with you about what you talked about today, where is the best place to message you? I'll be sure to add that to the notes as well.
Yeah, so easily I respond to LinkedIn messages very quickly. I'm on there a lot again because I found such a great community there. But if you just you got a quick question, you want to chat, please don't hesitate, to reach out on legatostrategic.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. It is fairly Workday student specific. Like I said, if you follow me on LinkedIn, it's a lot of Workday student, but I also try to do broader advice or just kind of bring things out. There's also a ton of great people doing project management stuff on LinkedIn. And so I've been getting into some of that. And then, yeah, I mean, they're happy to email me directly at kkelpe@legatostrategic.com. Any of those means, I love to have a conversation. I call it like a 15-minute, virtual coffee. You're just like, that was some interesting stuff. Let's just connect. Would love to do that. I love, as you know, David, I love just chatting about things. People that know me, they're like, you're super passionate. And yeah, and so I'm like, if you just want to chat more about experience, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, definitely. So passionate, so kind, so competent, and extraordinary. Which I feel like I've asked a couple questions on like the Facebook group, and 5 minutes later I'll get a text from you being like, just yesterday. Well, I'm going to timestamp this interview so hard. I maybe 5 minutes later, you're like, so what exactly do you need to do with that? So I really appreciate having you in the community as a colleague, as a mentor. I know it's really shaped my approach to things and my journey. So thank you for being so present in the community, and for the other people in the industry as well. And it's been so great catching up with you, Kristina. And this was a really wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and your insights with us. Your journey and your expertise have given us a lot to think about, which is always great. And thanks again for joining me on the show.
Thanks, David.
This is Blueprint Breakdowns, your quick reference guide after discussion. Here, we extract the essentials, highlight key points, and help you carry clear takeaways back to your daily work. No guesswork needed. First, start with understanding before implementing. Kristina's grad school lesson still applies. You need to absorb everything. You need to identify what's important. The same is true for any system or process. Communication is everything. Whether you're building workflows, documentation, or processes, meet people where they are. Admission counselors and IT teams don't speak the same language. Your documentation shouldn't expect them to. Third, proactive validation beats reactive firefighting. Simple reports and dashboards that catch issues early can save schools millions of dollars and prevent major headaches. Consulting should empower, not handcuff. Legato's approach is about filling gaps, providing strategic guidance, and then stepping back, allowing institutions to own and operate their systems with confidence. And finally, sometimes the best project management approach isn't agile or waterfall. It's common sense. Stay flexible, adapt to the institution, and always keep your eye on the actual goal, not just the checklist. That's your Blueprint Breakdown for this episode. For those watching the video, or willing just to see our next mascot, I need a name for our segment, The Consultant Cadre. Send me an email at theinnovationforagepodcast@gmail.com, or find me on the socials like LinkedIn and Instagram to comment your suggestion. As always, I'll send the ebook of The Innovation Forge to all winning name submitters. If you enjoyed today's episode, please grow the guild by rating and reviewing the Innovation Forge podcast, or sharing it with a colleague who needs to hear about these creative crossovers in education. The best review or comment every month will get an ebook of my book, of course. Particularly great ones will also be featured on future episodes. Thank you so much for joining me in the workshop today. Remember to strike true, and let's forge something extraordinary together.